She had always liked music, but the piano had always felt a little too big and complicated for her. Her fingers felt clumsy when she tried to press the keys, and she never knew if the notes she played would sound right. Still, she liked to sit by the piano when no one was around and tap on the keys quietly. It made her feel calm, like she could forget about all the noise and stress outside. One morning, her mother came into the living room with a smile that seemed to hide a little excitement. She told her that there would be a small family gathering that weekend and asked if she could play a simple melody on the piano. At first, she hesitated. She was shy about performing, even in front of people she knew. The idea of everyone watching made her stomach twist with nerves. But her mother gently encouraged her, saying it didn't have to be perfect. It was just for fun, and everyone would be happy to hear her play. That night, she sat at the piano in the living room. The old wooden keys felt cold under her fingers. She picked a simple tune that she had seen in a beginner's piano book. Her first few attempts were awkward. Her fingers fumbled, missing notes, and sometimes she pressed two keys at once by mistake. It was frustrating and she wanted to give up. But then she remembered her mother's words and tried again. This time slowly, one note at a time. She lived with her grandfather, a man everyone in the neighborhood knew. He had the kind of presence that made people pay attention without him saying much. He had a leather jacket with patches from places he had been and a quiet look in his eyes. Some people were afraid of him because he looked tough, but she had always felt safe around him. He had a way of showing care without many words. Today, he sat in the corner of the living room, reading a newspaper but glancing up every now and then to watch her practice. She noticed him, and his calm presence made her feel a little braver. She tried the melody again, and this time it started to sound a little better. The notes were uneven, and her fingers still slipped, but she could feel the tune starting to take shape. Her grandfather put down the newspaper and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't say anything, but she could sense that he was paying attention, really paying attention, in a way that made her want to do her best. After practicing for a while, she decided to take a break. She sat back and watched the sunlight fall across the wooden floor. The room smelled faintly of old books and coffee, a smell that always reminded her of home. She thought about the weekend and how she would have to play in front of everyone. Her heart beat faster at the thought, but there was also a small spark of excitement. Maybe she could do it. Maybe she could make the simple melody sound beautiful. The next day, she returned to the piano. She remembered a video she had seen online of someone playing the same tune. The person's fingers moved so quickly and smoothly, hitting every note perfectly. She wanted to play like that, but she also knew she was not there yet. She focused on getting each note right one at a time. Slowly, the tune began to flow more naturally. She felt proud of herself for the first time in a long while. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Her grandfather watched from the doorway. He didn't say much, but there was a faint smile on his face. She wondered if he had ever played the piano himself. He seemed like the kind of person who had many stories hidden behind his quiet eyes, stories he didn't often share. She had asked him once about his past, but he always changed the subject with a gentle laugh or a shrug. She thought maybe, just maybe, he could understand how it felt to start learning something new. As the days passed, she practiced more, growing a little more confident each time. She began to imagine what it would be like at the family gathering. People would sit around, chatting, laughing, and then she would play her melody. She pictured their faces, some smiling, some nodding politely, and some looking surprised. The thought of making them happy gave her courage, even if she still felt nervous. The evening before the gathering, she stayed at the piano until her fingers hurt. She repeated the melody over and over, listening carefully to each note. She started to notice small patterns in the tune, little places where she could add a tiny flourish or change the rhythm slightly. It made the simple melody feel more alive, more like her own creation. She felt a thrill in her chest, a mixture of excitement and fear. What if she made a mistake in front of everyone? What if they didn't like it? But she also knew that if she didn't try, she would regret it. Her grandfather came into the room quietly, carrying a cup of tea. He sat down beside her, not saying a word, and watched her play. After a few minutes, he spoke softly. "You've got a good touch," he said. She looked at him, surprised. He never complimented her on anything so directly. "Keep going," he added, and then he went back to his chair. His words, simple as they were, made her feel stronger. Later that night, she lay in bed thinking about the piano and her grandfather. She wondered what stories he had kept hidden all these years, stories that no one in the family knew. There was a mystery about him, a side that was gentle and thoughtful under the tough exterior. She liked to think that maybe, just maybe, he had played music in his life before she was born. That thought made her feel connected to him in a way she hadn't before. The next morning, she woke up early, full of anticipation. Today was the day she would play for the family. She practiced one last time, carefully going through the melody, making sure her fingers remembered each note. She felt a little more calm now, a little more ready. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and that mattered more than anything. When the family started arriving, she could hear the laughter and chatter from the other room. She took a deep breath and went to the piano. Her grandfather sat nearby, his presence reassuring. She looked at him and smiled, and he nodded slightly, a small gesture that gave her confidence. She put her fingers on the keys and started to play. The first notes were quiet, careful, but soon the melody began to flow. Her fingers moved with more ease than she expected. She could feel the music filling the room, reaching everyone who was listening. She glanced at her grandfather, who watched her with a soft, thoughtful expression. She played the simple melody as best as she could, and for the first time she didn't feel scared. She felt like she was sharing a piece of herself, and that was enough. By the time she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then there were smiles and gentle claps. She felt a warm rush of happiness and relief. Her grandfather stood and gave her a small, proud nod. It wasn't much, but it said everything she needed to hear. She realized that the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a way to connect, a way to show who she was without words. And with her grandfather watching, she felt like maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something wonderful. The morning of the family gathering was bright and lively. Sunlight poured through the windows, lighting up the living room in warm shades. She could hear laughter and chatter from the kitchen and the backyard, as relatives and friends arrived. She felt a mix of excitement and nerves in her stomach. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment when all her practice would be tested in front of others. Her grandfather sat quietly in his chair, watching the room come alive. He didn't say much, but his calm presence gave her courage. She noticed him glancing at the piano every now and then, as if he was making sure she felt ready. She took a deep breath and went to the piano, touching the keys gently. They felt familiar now, almost like old friends. Relatives were settling into the living room. Some were talking, some were laughing, and some were just watching the room with quiet curiosity. She could feel their eyes on her even though they were pretending to be busy with conversation. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her fingers on the keys. She looked at her grandfather, who gave her a small nod. That tiny gesture made her feel stronger. When she began playing, the first few notes were careful and soft. The melody was simple, just as she had practiced. She focused on each note, making sure she played it cleanly. At first, people continued their conversations, glancing occasionally at her, but gradually, the music began to draw their attention. The chatter slowed, and more heads turned toward the piano. She noticed her grandfather leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. There was a strange softness in his eyes, a kind of pride mixed with nostalgia. She couldn't understand why, but it made her want to play even better. The melody seemed to flow more naturally now, her fingers moving with more confidence. She remembered the little flourishes she had added during practice, the small changes in rhythm that made the tune her own. People started to stop what they were doing and listen. Some smiled, some whispered to each other, and some watched silently, fascinated by the sound. She could feel the warmth of their attention, and it made her feel alive in a way she had never felt before. She played carefully, making sure not to make mistakes, but also trying to express herself through the music. Each note felt like a tiny piece of her heart reaching out to everyone in the room. Halfway through the melody, she added a little variation she had learned from a video online. It was a small change, almost unnoticeable at first, but it made the music richer and more flowing. Her grandfather's eyes widened slightly. He didn't speak, but she could feel that he noticed the change. She played on, encouraged by the silent support. The music felt like it was no longer just her own. It was a connection between her grandfather, and everyone listening. She glanced around the room briefly. People were leaning forward, eyes fixed on her hands. Some had their mouths slightly open in surprise at how good it sounded. She had expected polite smiles, but this reaction was more than she imagined. She felt a thrill of pride, but also a little fear. She didn't want to ruin the moment with a mistake. She took a deep breath and continued, letting the melody carry her. As she reached the final notes, she noticed her grandfather sitting straighter now. There was something different in his eyes, a kind of recognition, almost like a memory. She wondered if he had played the piano himself once, long ago, before she was born. The thought made her play with even more feeling, letting the music tell a story she couldn't put into words. When she finished the melody, there was a brief moment of silence. Everyone seemed frozen, caught by the unexpected beauty of the performance. Then, slowly, the room filled with applause and gentle cheers. She felt a rush of happiness and relief. Her hands were shaking, but she smiled, looking at her grandfather. He smiled back, a small, proud smile that made her heart swell. After she stepped away from the piano, relatives came over to compliment her. They said how talented she was, how they didn't expect her to play so beautifully, and how much they enjoyed listening. She blushed, feeling shy but also proud. The simple melody had become something special, something that everyone would remember. Her grandfather stood quietly to the side, watching the interactions. He didn't join in the compliments, but he seemed satisfied. Later, when the room quieted down, he walked over to her and spoke softly. "You did well," he said. His voice was low, but there was warmth in it. "Better than I expected." She looked up at him, surprised. His words meant more than all the applause in the room. She realized that he had always believed in her, even when she doubted herself. The family gathering continued, but the music lingered in the air. People talked about the melody, how it had made them feel, and how unexpected it was from someone so young. She felt proud not only of her performance but also of the connection she had shared with everyone. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge between her and the people around her. Later, when most guests had left, she sat quietly at the piano again. She played the melody softly, thinking about the day and everything that had happened. Her grandfather sat beside her, silent but close. She could feel his presence, steady and reassuring. For the first time, she understood a little more about him, the quiet strength he carried and the hidden layers behind his tough exterior. She realized that the family gathering had been more than just an opportunity to play the piano. It had been a moment to connect, to share a part of herself, and to discover a little about the people she loved. The applause and compliments were wonderful, but what mattered most was the feeling of being understood and appreciated. Her grandfather's quiet approval was a gift she would remember forever. That night, she went to bed with a sense of accomplishment. The simple melody had become something more, something that carried emotions, memories, and connections. She thought about her grandfather and wondered about the stories he had kept hidden. There was a mystery about him, a side she had never seen before, and it fascinated her. Maybe one day he would tell her about it. For now, she felt content. She had faced her fear, played her music, and shared it with the people she cared about. The experience had taught her that sometimes small steps and simple melodies could create moments of magic. She drifted off to sleep, dreaming of music, family, and the quiet strength of the grandfather who had always been there, watching, waiting, and believing in her. The morning after the family gathering, she woke up with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The applause from the day before still echoed in her mind. She had not expected her performance to go so well, and yet, a small part of her felt that she could do even better. She sat at the piano, placing her fingers on the keys, and started practicing the melody again. This time she tried something new. She experimented with tiny changes in rhythm and added small flourishes she had been too afraid to attempt before. Her fingers moved more confidently now. Each note seemed to flow naturally into the next. She felt a sense of freedom in the music that she had never experienced before. It was no longer just about playing the melody correctly. It was about expressing herself through sound. Her grandfather entered the room quietly, as he always did, and watched her practice. He didn't interrupt or comment at first, but she could sense his attention. There was something in the way he looked at her, a kind of recognition, as if he understood the language of the music in a way only he could. She played the melody again, this time with more variation. She added small pauses, subtle changes in tone, and a few improvisations she had learned from watching videos. The simple tune began to transform into something richer, more emotional. She could feel the music reaching beyond the keys, touching something inside her. Her grandfather's eyes softened, and she noticed a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. It was the first time she had seen him react so openly to her music. Encouraged by his quiet approval, she continued to play, letting herself get lost in the melody. Each note carried a piece of her heart, a piece of her story. She had never felt so alive, so connected to the piano and to the person watching her. The music seemed to fill the entire room, wrapping around her and her grandfather, creating a shared space of emotion and understanding. Her grandfather finally spoke, his voice low but filled with warmth. "You're really good," he said. "Better than I expected. Keep going." His words were simple, but they meant everything to her. She felt a surge of pride and confidence. For the first time, she realized that the piano was not just an instrument. It was a way to communicate, a way to share her feelings with others without saying a single word. As the day went on, she played the melody repeatedly, experimenting with different variations. She noticed that she could change the mood of the tune with slight adjustments in timing and pressure. Sometimes it sounded gentle and soothing, other times lively and spirited. She began to understand that music was not just about notes on a page. It was about emotion, timing, and expression. Her grandfather listened silently, occasionally nodding or tilting his head as if remembering something from his own past. By the afternoon, she felt ready to try the melody in front of a small audience again. Her family was gathered in the living room, chatting and laughing, unaware that she had been practicing new variations. She sat at the piano, fingers poised over the keys, and began to play. The familiar tune started softly, but soon she added the subtle changes she had been working on. The melody sounded fuller, richer, and more alive than ever before. Her family noticed immediately. Conversations stopped, and all eyes turned toward her. They were surprised at how much the simple melody had grown into something expressive and moving. Some whispered to each other, pointing out the small changes in rhythm and tone that made the music so captivating. She played on, feeling the music flowing naturally, almost as if it were guiding her fingers. Her grandfather watched closely, his eyes following every movement of her hands. She could see a change in his expression, a mix of pride, nostalgia, and something else she couldn't quite identify. He seemed to recognize the depth of feeling she was putting into the music, and she felt a deep connection to him in that moment. It was as if the piano had become a bridge between them, a way to communicate emotions that words could not capture. As the melody continued, she added small flourishes and improvisations, testing the limits of her skill. The music became more complex, yet it still carried the charm and simplicity of the original tune. She felt exhilarated, as if she were discovering a hidden part of herself with each note. Her family was silent now, completely absorbed in the music. They had expected a simple, pleasant performance, but what they were hearing was far more beautiful and moving than they had imagined. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds, as if everyone needed time to process what they had just heard. Then the applause began, gentle at first, and then growing louder. Her family members came over, offering compliments and praise. They told her how amazed they were at her talent and how surprised they were by the depth of feeling in her performance. She felt a mixture of pride and humility, realizing that her music had touched them in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her grandfather stood quietly to the side, observing the scene. He didn't say much, but she could see the satisfaction and pride in his eyes. Later, he approached her and spoke softly. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said. "You've got real talent. Keep it up." His words were more than encouragement. They were a recognition of her potential and a subtle acknowledgement of the connection they shared through music. After the applause died down, she sat back at the piano and played the melody again, this time for herself. She explored new variations, experimenting with timing and expression, feeling the music flow through her. Her grandfather joined her on the sofa, watching quietly, occasionally giving a nod or a faint smile. She felt a sense of calm and contentment, realizing that the music was no longer just an exercise or a performance. It was a form of self-expression, a way to connect with others and with herself. The day passed in a blur of music and conversation. Every time she sat at the piano, she discovered something new, a small detail in the melody or a different way to express a note. Her grandfather's presence remained constant, a steady support that made her feel secure and encouraged. She began to understand that her talent was not just about skill, but about passion, emotion, and the courage to express herself. By evening, she felt exhausted but happy. She had pushed herself beyond what she thought was possible and had discovered a new depth to her music. She realized that the simple melody she had started with had grown into something much more meaningful, something that reflected her personality and emotions. Her grandfather's quiet admiration had been the catalyst, giving her the confidence to explore and express herself fully. Before going to bed, she sat at the piano one last time. She played softly, letting the music carry her thoughts and emotions. She thought about her grandfather, about the quiet strength and hidden layers he possessed. She wondered about the life he had lived before she was born, the experiences and memories that shaped him into the person he was today. The music felt like a connection to him, a shared language that didn't require words. As she finished the melody and rested her fingers on the keys, she felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. She knew that this was only the beginning of her journey with the piano. There was so much more to learn, so many ways to grow and express herself. The simple melody had become a gateway to something greater, and she was eager to see where it would lead her. Her grandfather watched her quietly, a small smile on his face. He didn't need to say anything. The connection they shared through the music was enough. She had discovered her talent, and he had recognized it in a way that was both private and profound. The room was filled with the lingering sound of the melody, a reminder of the day's discoveries and the bond they shared. It was a moment she would never forget, a turning point in her journey as a musician and as a person. The morning after her breakthrough practice, she woke up feeling excited but also a little anxious. She had spent the entire night thinking about her grandfather and the way he had watched her play. There was a part of her that wanted to ask him about his past, to know more about the man who had always seemed so tough but had quietly encouraged her music. She didn't know how to bring it up, but she felt that today might be the right moment. She went to the living room, where the piano sat waiting for her. Her grandfather was already there, sitting in his usual chair, reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered, and for the first time, she noticed a softness in his eyes that went deeper than she had ever seen. She placed her fingers on the keys and started to play the melody softly. It was a calm, gentle rendition, different from the energetic variations she had practiced the day before. She felt as if the music itself was asking for a conversation. After a few minutes of playing, she stopped and turned to him. "Grandpa," she began softly, "have you ever played the piano before?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he set the newspaper aside and leaned back in his chair. "A long time ago," he said quietly. "Before you were born, I used to play a lot. In clubs, small halls, places like that. Music was a big part of my life once." Her eyes widened. She had never imagined that he had this side of himself. The man who had seemed so strict and tough, who rarely spoke about his past, had once been a musician. Really? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. He nodded. Yes, life took me in a different direction, and I had to leave it behind. I couldn't do it forever, not with everything else I had to handle. But I never forgot the music. And seeing you play, it reminds me of that time. She felt a rush of emotions. Surprise, admiration, and a little sadness. She could see how much music had meant to him, and she realized that her own talent might have come from him in some way. She wanted to know more. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? She asked gently. He sighed, looking down at his hands. I had my reasons. I wanted to be strong for the family, to keep things safe and simple. Music, it felt like a part of a life that was no longer mine. I didn't want anyone to expect things from me that I couldn't give. And I wanted to protect you from disappointment if you ever tried and struggled. She listened, understanding more about him than she ever had before. She realized that his silence had not been a lack of care, but a way of showing love in his own way. I'm glad you told me, she said softly. It makes me feel like we're connected in a new way. He smiled faintly, a rare, quiet smile that made her heart feel warm. We are, he said. Music has a way of connecting people, even when words don't. For the next few hours, they sat together in the living room. She played the melody again, this time letting the music flow freely, without worrying about mistakes or perfection. He listened, occasionally giving small suggestions or nodding in approval. He told her about the techniques he had used, the subtle ways to change the tone and rhythm to make the music more expressive. She was fascinated, absorbing every word, every gesture, every hint of his experience. As she played, he shared stories about the clubs he had performed in, the people he had met, and the challenges he had faced. She could see the pride in his eyes when he spoke of his younger self, and the sadness when he remembered the life he had to leave behind. She realized that the grandfather she knew, the strong, silent man, had a whole world inside him that no one had ever seen. And now, through her music, that world was beginning to surface again. The afternoon passed in a quiet, gentle rhythm. She experimented with the melody, adding small improvisations and exploring the emotional depth of each note. He watched closely, sometimes guiding her hands, sometimes letting her find her own way. She felt a sense of freedom she had never felt before. A sense that the piano was no longer just a challenge or a task, but a way to express herself and connect with someone she loved deeply. At one point, she played a section of the melody more softly, almost as if she were whispering a secret. He leaned closer, eyes softening. That's good, he said. Music is about feelings, not just notes. You're learning to speak without words. She smiled, feeling encouraged and inspired. The bond between them grew stronger with each note, each story, each moment of shared understanding. She realized that this was more than just learning to play the piano. It was about discovering the depth of her grandfather's life, and in turn, discovering herself. As the evening approached, she felt tired but happy. The living room was filled with the lingering sound of the melody, a gentle reminder of the day's discoveries. Her grandfather looked at her with quiet pride. You have real talent, he said again, his voice calm but sincere. Keep playing, keep learning. Don't be afraid to express yourself. She nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. The secret he had shared, the stories he had told, and the encouragement he had given had opened a new world for her. She knew that the piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge to her grandfather, to her own emotions, and to a future filled with music and connection. Before going to bed, she sat at the piano one last time, playing the melody softly, letting the music carry her thoughts and feelings. She thought about the grandfather who had always seemed so tough, so quiet, and realized that there was so much more to him than she had ever known. His secret, shared now, had changed everything. It had created a bond between them that was unspoken yet powerful, a connection that would last a lifetime. She drifted off to sleep that night feeling inspired, grateful, and connected. The simple melody had led to the revelation of a hidden past, a secret life that had shaped the man she loved and respected. And through music, they had found a way to share their hearts, their stories, and their emotions. It was a moment she would never forget, a turning point that marked the beginning of a deeper relationship and a journey into the world of music that would continue to grow with every note she played. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the living room. She woke up with a sense of purpose and excitement. After the events of the past few days, she felt different, more confident, more connected to herself and to her grandfather. The piano, once a daunting instrument, now felt like a friend, a way to express feelings she couldn't put into words. She walked into the living room, where her grandfather sat in his usual chair, sipping his morning coffee. He looked at her with a quiet smile, and she felt a wave of comfort wash over her. They had shared something important, something that went beyond words, and she knew their relationship had changed in a way that would last forever. Without a word, she sat at the piano and began to play the melody she had been practicing. Her fingers moved confidently over the keys, producing a sound that was richer and more expressive than ever before. She experimented with new variations, adding subtle flourishes and dynamics she had never tried before. Each note felt alive, each pause meaningful, and each rise and fall of the melody carried emotion. Her grandfather listened quietly, occasionally nodding or tilting his head in approval. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough. She felt as if the music and the silence between them were speaking volumes, telling stories of courage, love, and discovery. She realized that the piano had become a bridge not only to him but also to herself. It was teaching her patience, confidence, and the joy of expressing who she was through sound. After playing for a while, she decided to try a new idea. She combined elements of the simple melody she had started with and the variations she had learned from her grandfather's guidance. The music flowed naturally, a blend of her own creativity and the wisdom he had shared. As she played, she noticed a new level of control over the keys, a new ability to shape the melody exactly how she wanted it to sound. She felt a thrill of satisfaction. This was what it meant to create something that was truly hers. The day passed quickly, filled with music, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. She played for her grandfather, who occasionally shared stories about the techniques he had used or the emotions he had expressed in his own performances long ago. She listened closely, absorbing every detail, feeling as though she were connecting to a part of history that had been hidden from her until now. The piano became a space where generations met, where past and present blended seamlessly. Later in the afternoon, she decided to play for the rest of the family again. They gathered in the living room, curious and excited to hear her new variations. When she began, the familiar melody quickly transformed into something more expressive and captivating. Her family was amazed at how much she had grown in such a short time. They watched in awe as her fingers danced across the keys, shaping the melody with emotion and skill. Her grandfather sat quietly in the corner, watching her with pride. He could see the progress she had made and the passion she poured into every note. He realized that his secret, once hidden, had now found a new life in her hands. Music had returned to the home, not just as sound, but as a shared experience, a bond that brought joy, pride, and connection. As the melody ended, the room was silent for a moment, absorbing the beauty and depth of what they had just witnessed. Then, slowly, applause filled the space. Her family members came over to compliment her, praising her talent, dedication, and creativity. She smiled shyly, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a part of her life, a way to share her heart with the people she loved. In the evening, after everyone had left, she sat at the piano once more. Her grandfather joined her and together they played. She followed his lead, mimicking the subtle techniques he used, while he responded to her creativity with gentle guidance. The music was a conversation, a dance of sound and emotion that required no words. She felt completely at ease, completely herself, and completely connected to him. As night fell, she realized that her journey with the piano had only just begun. She wanted to continue learning, to explore new melodies, to express herself in ways she had never imagined. Her grandfather encouraged her, reminding her that talent was not enough. It was passion, practice, and a willingness to share oneself that truly mattered. She understood that now more deeply than ever. Before going to bed, she reflected on everything that had happened. The simple melody she had started with had grown into something much larger, something that had revealed hidden talents, strengthened bonds, and opened new doors. She had discovered not only her own abilities but also the depth and richness of her grandfather's past. Through music, they had found a way to connect, to communicate, and to inspire each other. She drifted off to sleep with the melody still in her mind, feeling proud, inspired, and hopeful. The piano was no longer just a challenge or a hobby. It was a part of who she was and a symbol of the connection she shared with her grandfather. She knew that every note she played in the future would carry the lessons, the stories, and the love they had shared. It was a beginning, a promise of growth, discovery, and endless possibilities.